Thanks for joining us on the show this week, guys. My name is Samantha and Zessie.
My name is Remoy George. I got this sexy voice. Philip again, so does Samantha because she's sick too.
Oh, yeah, got that rasp. And this is Masculinity. Thank you. This is Raspy Masculinity this week, you guys. Thanks for joining us. So Remoy and I are going to BuzzFeed it today. We're not sponsored by BuzzFeed.
Not yet.
Yet. Not mean. But we're going to do some top three. Okay, some top three action. I'm a little delirious, you guys. I've been sick all week, so please just forgive my...
Not that Samantha sleeps ever. I thought I didn't sleep, but Samantha really doesn't sleep, so just humor her.
Maybe I just won't sleep. It's fine. Okay, great. So, and then Remoy's got this dope segment that he's been working on called the Dad Cave, which I don't really know about the whole Dad Cave situation. We might need to go ahead and
do a brainstorming
on that
gonna do
name.
Dad bod, but I don't really know if that really works.
Oh no! I'm so mad at the Dad bod. Don't get me started on the Dad bod,
definitely not
Remoy.
doing the Dad bod. But however, and I want to take a quick minute to make an aside and apologize because when we had recorded last week's episode, I was definitely out on Atlanta. But then the last two episodes have dropped, or the next two episodes have dropped, which were the barbershop, which was fucking hilarious, which was like a Friday episode.
Amazing.
That was so perfect. It made me so happy.
It was so
and
good.
Then last night, or
don't tell me because I haven't seen it yet.
This
yes,
latest episode called Champagne Papi
Yeah.
was so macabre. And so has so many issues tied to fatherhood or connections tied to fatherhood that I think we may call this segment Champagne Papi.
Okay.
Shout out to
Drake.
Shout out to Drake. Shout out to Big Papi. Shout out to Donald Glover, who was in whiteface this whole episode, and it's super fucking weird.
Oh my God, really?
So yeah, we may call. I think I'm gonna roll with Champagne Papi at least for the time being. But yeah,
I'm into it. So I mean, I guess so. In this interview segment, you're gonna be sitting down with dads around the world and talking about what it's like to be a dad, which is awesome. Are you prepping for being dad? Because you're not a dad, right?
I don't think I ever.
No youngsters for you. Okay.
At one point in my life, I wanted to be a dad, but that's because I didn't know you could have the option to not be a dad. But I definitely don't want to be a dad.
Fair.
I know that may screw with a lot of people's worldview or purviews, but I don't want to be a papi.
And I appreciate that because I feel like a lot of people who don't want to be dads become dads, and it's like, if you don't want to be a dad, please don't be a dad.
And we're not just saying dad to gender. We're meaning moms too. If you want to be a mom, perfect.
Don't be a mom.
If you don't want to be a mom, don't be a mom.
I jumped the gun there.
Societal pressures off here.
You're still at the part where you're like, if you don't want to be a mom.
Anyway, so
great.
Before we move any further, like a few episodes ago, we recorded with Eric Bussey, and I casually kept throwing the word out like hegemony, right? And that's a word I learned in college when I got to New York, and I was like, hegemony. Oh, I get it. I understand this. I needed a word for this experience and this phenomenon that I never had before, and then I had the word, and now I just pull it out of the holster and just shoot quickly anytime I want to, on a podcast with Eric Bussey. But I feel kind of bad about it because I threw it out there real casual, and there's no real context for people who may not know what that word means, and it may be kind of off-putting. And sometimes you use a term which is a little bit more translatable, which is dominant standard.
Right. Yeah.
But to you, dominant standard is...
You know that the dominant standard is just a man being strong, a man expected to step up when situations that call for physical strength. And that's not just seen as a human deed. It's seen as being the end-all, be-all protector. It's seen as being masculine, right? And it's if you as a man don't embody that, then there's something wrong with you. The dominant standard is expecting women to defer to men as a protective authority when things get challenging. The issue is not that men are being protective. The issue is that if a woman comes along and has these types of character traits, right? If she's strong, if she's protective, if she's authoritative, if she's a take charge person by nature, she's expected to let that go the second a man walks to her room. And the dominant standard though is to not have them be. The dominant standard is for people to fold into these very specific binary categories. And if you're anywhere outside of that, then you are not human. You have to somehow subscribe. And actually, if you're anywhere outside of that, in a lot of cases, it can lead to your, to you being harmed physically. For example, I mean, we still, I don't know how this is a national health crisis that the life expectancy of a Black trans woman is still 35 years old. Laverne Cox was on Instagram earlier this week, like talking about, hey, I'm still here, hey, I'm still alive or whatever. I'm not actually sure how old she is, but I'm presuming that she's somewhere like above 35 and it's just like, damn, like it's actually a miracle that I'm still alive because usually people like me are dead by this time.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about a cartoon.
Okay.
I used to watch Nickelodeon. And for those millennials who are a little too millennial who don't know what Doug is, Doug was this like cartoon about this kind of plain Jane, average, a little bit chubby, normal, albeit white or peach or not brown guy, just like me. And, Doug was kind of awkward, and he was like he was kind of like a little bit lonely and trying to awkwardly navigate his way through high school. He did like keep this cool journal, and that's how kind of the episodes were bookended. He'd write in his journal, which was just like me again. And he had this crush on this cute girl named Patty Mayonnaise, who kind of looked like a lot like the version of the first girl I ever kissed. Shout out to you, Amber Lewis.
That's cute.
Anyways, an ongoing gag in Doug was that Doug himself had this like serious like disgust for liver and onions. His mom would make it, and every time he had to eat it, he'd be like grossly disgusted by the smell and the look and the idea of liver and onions. And now I remember like watching that and thinking to myself, if Doug thinks liver and onions is gross, then I kind of have to think it's gross too, right? Like the problem was like my mom used to make liver and onions, and they were really fucking good, and I loved them. Shout out to you, Mom. But again, Doug hated liver and onions, and he was out there on Nickelodeon for millions of kids to watch, and they probably all hated liver and onions too. So that meant I had to kind of closet my love for liver and onions. Okay,
I mean, so that cartoon-ish, actually just cartoon anecdote may not be exactly what we mean when we say hegemony or dominant standard, but we're going to kind of do our top three hegemonic, thank you, tropes to better materialize what hegemony.
There we go.
And the dominant standard look like in our everyday world.
Yeah,
so
like,
Remoy,
I don't know if you can do top three list of like three really bad things, but like we're just gonna do like our bronze, silver, and gold of like the worst hegemonic, and dominant standard things we interact with, right, on the regular, and like the tropes that they kind of interact, or the tropes that they like teach us and inform us, right? So I'm gonna start with my bronze. Okay, this is the third on my, I think that was the worst, and this goes back to the 90s as well. But like, Michael Jordan was God. He was like the second coming of Jesus. He just happened to wear Nikes and like had a killer fadeaway jump shot, and he yammed on dudes all day. But there was this thing, like Nike ran this campaign, and it became like the first commercial athlete campaign that really changed the way that sports and pop culture interacted, and that was like, be like Mike. And it was all about being like this one person, this one athlete. But the problem with that is like basketball is a team sport. And Michael Jordan, like once I like got a little bit older, I graduated out of my like 13-year-old adolescent body and got a little older, and my mind kind of expanded. I realized Michael Jordan was a horrible human being, and he was competitive to a point at no cost where he would sacrifice anything, his family, like listen to his MVP or his Hall of Fame speech. Like he hung his son out to dry.
His mom had 2 jobs. I was like, homie, you're Michael Jordan. Why does your mom have 2 jobs?
Like he would do anything to be competitive, and he was greedy and he was selfish, but it was such an informative part of like any kid who like loved sports in the 90s, and still so. Like we put so much precedent on the alpha male and like the leader of the team and the MVP, we like to shift this conversation a little bit more into sports. Like we do this about LeBron all the time, where like LeBron's not like Michael. He's not the greatest. Right. He's not this alpha. We keep saying the term alpha. And it's just so interesting that like if you aren't the alpha but you want to play sports, or you just want to be a guy, you have to be seen. You have to project this alpha maleness to be seen as a true man or as a leader. You got to be like Mike, and I think that's problematic.
It's so interesting because coincidentally, LeBron is seen as that non-alpha. I don't want to say beta because I feel like that goes a little too far, but because he's a team player. I'm like, homie, are we talking about basketball or are we talking about tennis? Anyway, I'm with you. I'm with you with that.
Okay, so that was my bronze. Now, humor me all. Here's my silver. Now, this one, this is for a particularly niche audience, but that niche audience, get ready to clap. And that is the Apu Indian accent from The Simpsons. And, you know, it's been really cool to see a lot of South Asian Americans and subcontinent Americans come out and, like, really kind of stand out and voice kind of this really oppressive and bullying
Shout out to
tradition
Hari.
that was the Apu accent. And it was Hank Azaria on The Simpsons who played a South Asian character who owned a fucking 7-Eleven and gave you your slushies, but he just really like exacerbated the accent, and it really made anybody who came from the South Asian continent, whether they had an accent or not, feel like an outsider. And like it tormented a lot of kids, myself including, who were just trying to just be themselves and normalize and feel comfortable in their own skin and skin color. But because of how it was communicated through pop culture, through the television, through the box that everybody sat on Sunday afternoons or evenings to watch The Simpsons, it informed the way that we saw ourselves and how others saw South Asians as othered and as the butt of the joke, just strictly on their accent or the traditions that came along with their accent and the places that they come from. It wasn't allowed to be celebrated, but it was more to be demonized.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that just speaks to like the dehumanization, right? It's like Apu was not allowed to be like a person. He had to be like some type of like caricature of like an actual person. And it's like to think about having that be a representation of actual people is, I mean, I guess we're going to get into it. Anyway, so now my bronze and silver, right?
Yeah, there's bronze and silver.
Bronze and silver.
Get on that medal stand.
Yeah. So I guess my bronze is men being visual creatures. Okay. So and I get the part about like, okay, so women are objectified in movies. Obviously, men are also objectified in movies, right? Remoy and I actually before we started recording, we're kind of having a little brainstorming session. And I was recalling the Transformers back in the day with Megan Fox and
I ain't mad at you, Megan Fox. Don't be mad at me.
I mean, how can you be? I love Megan Fox like everybody else, but she basically.
I was about to say something really fucked up, and then I was like, oh, Jesus, that's really fucked up. But anyways, keep going.
Glad you caught yourself there. Anyways, so there's like this one shot, right, in the very beginning of the movie where Shia LaBeouf is like, oh my God, this girl is so hot. And like, she's like obsessed with cars.
Too, so shout out to my man Shia.
I love Shia LaBeouf so much, actually. But yeah, she's like obsessed with cars. And so she's like looking in the hood of his car and there's just like a medium shot of her navel.
Oh, God.
And it's like, you know, stop. She's like tan. She's wearing a half top. Her like waistline is like super tiny. And I'm like, I don't know how old I was. I think I was like 17 or something when this came out. I think I was still in high school. And I don't know when whatever. But I'm looking at this like, damn, I need to get in the gym. Like, this is crazy, whatever. And it was just like the notion that actually, when I actually stopped to think about it, the thing that was really interesting about it was the fact about that character was the fact that she was really into cars and like knew her way around cars. And as somebody who had gone into, you know, a mechanic shop and been like swindled because I was a woman, I was really impressed by that. But the first thing that I, like everybody else watching, I had to be impressed by, because that's what the film was calling for, was her immaculate body. And it was like everything about the way that she was being represented on screen was about her being a trophy. You know, to your point, it's like we're conditioned to do in the very beginning to start with is always to look at women visually. Like, what part of my body does this tickle? Like, what fantasy can I draw from seeing Megan Fox's navel?
I think it's also interesting is like when I grew up in Texas, like it wasn't necessarily Megan Fox, but it was like whether it was the TV or whether it was like the Abercrombie and like going to the mall or the American Eagle, right? Like there was these very skinny white girls, blonde, brunette, just surfer, wearing their holdy jeans and like cut off shorts and like, sure, that objectified women, and that's one problematic issue with that. But it also like conditioned the way that whether you're a man or woman, like if you're attracted to women, who you should think is attractive, and for very rigorous reasons, like they're skinny, they're white, they look one traditional way, and that's it. And if you if you like are attracted to that, cool. If you're attracted to something different or a variety of different types of bodies or people or individuals, or even if you're not attracted to a person physically first, it conditions you to believe that you have to be this one way or you have to find attractive this one thing. And if not, you're an outsider. And that's, again, the problem with hegemony or the dominant standard. If you feel like an outsider, you have to kind of closet who you really are and project who you think the hegemony or this idea of the dominant standard wants you to be. And within the culture, we all kind of become complicit of reciprocating or reproducing and playing along with it. And so this objectifying a female's body, it becomes a horrible cycle of we see it, we enable it, we see it, we appreciate it, and it keeps going on and on.
Yeah, so my silver is, this is complicated, right? It's this notion of the man of the house. Like, who's the man of the house? Son, I'm going all the way on the trip. You're the man of the house now. There's this episode, you guys know I'm obsessed with This Is Us, like obsessed. And, when Jack dies, Rebecca says to the kid, she's like, neither one of you guys have to be the man of the house now that Jack is gone. You guys are 17-year-olds. I expect you to live your lives, which I was like, this is us for the win. Because there's this notion that, like, I understand the notion of like parenting and like, having like a balanced household, right? I think that there's a difference between that and like this notion that women are incomplete if there's not a man around, which I think that the notion of man of the house is kind of what that points to, like the sense that like, you go on a business trip and your 17-year-old son is supposed to be the man of the house, as if your wife is not running the shit all day long, even while your ass is here. You know what I'm saying? And I had something very specific in mind when I was thinking of this, because I can't stand Tyler Perry. I know that the new movie, I think it's called Alimony or Acrimony or whatever, is out with my girl Taraji, who I love. And I want to see the movie because I want to like give money, but I also don't want to see the movie because I can't stand Tyler Perry, because he always makes women look crazy, and it's always having to do with a man. And it makes me crazy because when I think about, we think about like representation, we think about the fact that this is somebody who it's important that Tyler Perry is making movies because he is responsible for a lot of Black actors having a lot of work. He's responsible for a lot of Black people having images in cinema. But the images that he has, I find to be so problematic. And this is another Taraji P movie called I Can't Do Bad All By Myself by Tyler Perry. And it's Adam Rodriguez. There's a scene where she's been taking care of her kids. Her children's father is this asshole. I mean, I guess he's not the children's father. He's their stepfather, who's been around for a long time, who's like trying to come on to like her teenage daughter, who's a dick, right? He's a dick, whatever. And there's this moment where she's with Adam Rodriguez's character, and she looks so weak, in the face of him. That is so not characteristic of who she has been her whole life, with kids, with this guy who she finally like closed the door on. And it wasn't like vulnerability. It was like, I need you to save me type of weakness, which I think is very like characteristic of Tyler Perry's movies when it comes to the way that he portrays women and their relationships to men. And I feel like with him, it's like particularly theatrical, so it's like really easy to point out how bad it is. But I think that that's a sentiment that pops up in a lot of different movies. And I feel like one of the main movies that I've seen that with that I thought was really great was Erin Brockovich, because she was stronger about her shit, and like you had to accept her for who she was rather than coming into the picture and saving things or making things better. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
I grew up in a single home. Like, I didn't have a man of the house. Like, my mom did the best she could, and she did fine. Like, it's problematic not only just for the women, but it's also problematic for the men, because it puts men in a position where they have to be this one type of quote-unquote masculine man. And it's ridiculous. But I think talking about movies, it's a great time to shift to our gold medal winners of our worst dominant standard traditions or hegemonic traditions, right? So I'm going to go with mine. Remoy's gold medal for shitty hegemony is the American boxing movie, right? Like, we've had this long tradition from probably way before Rocky, but I'm going to call it Rocky because it was one of my first, but the Rocky movies, and now we have the Creed movie, and everything in between. And it's like every year almost there's a boxing movie with an A-list celebrity, male actor, who takes on the role of this, like, traditionally impoverished, predominantly white character who is, having a tough experience just being himself, who's kind of a loner, is coming from all sorts of intersections of struggle, and gets into the ring and fights his way to the championship fight, or fights his way to the belt fight, and more often than not, he wins, and he's the hero, and he's strong, and he tables all his emotions and his vulnerability, and he doesn't really communicate. He's just aggressive, and he has to survive. And that's like so indoctrinated into our American idea of what it means to be an American, is the fight, is the struggle, is to be a survivor. But what if you don't look like that? Like, what if, just from the jump, what if the hegemony tells you this is what a hero looks like? You're strong and you're ripped and you just don't take no shit. What if you just don't even look like that? And that's informing you of who you are. You are not this, so then you are not the hero.
That's right.
And if every American actor, from Jake Gyllenhaal to now like Michael B. Jordan, is taking on this role, and it's like kind of this mantle you take on as an American movie star, what is that? How does that even more like reinforce and then celebrate the American boxer and the American boxing story, and then how all Americans must fight their way to their top? And if you're an American male and you're a masculine man, you gotta fight.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're speaking to is the objectification of the male body. Really, when you think about a boxer, right? That's it. There's really, I mean, it's like you're objectifying the male body because it's supposed to be strong, because it's supposed to be somebody because it's supposed to be something that can take the punch, give punches, no questions asked. And if you're not that, then it's like, well, what kind of man are you?
Exactly.
So I guess my big issue is kind of the lack of partnership between men and women on screen. I mean, generally speaking, I feel like, except for Black Panther, shout out to Black Panther. And I mean, not necessarily just Black Panther, right? I feel like a lot of superhero movies, in storylines that have, women superheroes well represented also do this. But I feel like usually it involves some kind of romance where the woman must serve as some kind of like romantic object, generally, no matter how strong she stands on her own, she's expected to take some type of supporting role in the presence of a man. So did you see Wonder Woman? No. Okay. So, I mean, Wonder Woman, it's like the shit, right? I mean, I shared my story about how I watched Wonder Woman or whatever, and like immediately after I beat both my brothers at beer pong, which they can tell you never happens. And like, I was so empowered by that movie. Yet, I do remember that there was like this notion that she came away from the Amazon world, right? And then she came into our world, which is fucked up and like has all these ideals about like the way that women's supposed to behave, the way that men are supposed to behave together. And what I am upset about, or what basically is representation of this dominant standard, is that instead of her, the strong superhero woman that she is, coming from this amazing world where people are like work together, where women are really strong, where they train, they like raise like leaders who can fight for themselves and who believe in right and wrong. Instead of being able to take some of that with her, she comes into our world and fully has to conform. She follows Chris Pine around or whatever, trying to get to this demon. And it's like, besides her super strength, she conforms to the world around her. She falls in love with this guy. She becomes, I mean, we saw in Justice League or whatever that apparently after Chris Pine's character dies, she's like really upset and she's gone. She like stays out of, the public eye for years on end or whatever, because she's so heartbroken. And it's like, in this storyline, why can't she be the one to bring some of that, all that, like that working together, that unity, that strength in numbers, that just kind of like that community sense of strength? Why can't she bring that with her? Why does she have to conform? And also, why is it on Chris Pine to have to lead somebody like Wonder Woman? That's crazy. I mean, I feel like he would have benefited. I mean, he was a spy. He was somebody who was doing big shit, right? He would have benefited from her leadership instead of leading her around with kind of the limited human knowledge that he knows, right? You've got like a superhero here and you're supposed to lead them. I don't know if that makes any sense. But I also feel like, you know, she's a woman, so it's like, well, that's just how that's going to be played, whether or not you're in a superhero life. So it's a bummer.
I think like with all these, with our bronze, silver, and gold shitty hegemonies, we really isolated like a lot of how it's problematic with the association in our pop culture and the culture that we download every day, the culture that's kind of showered upon us, whether we like it or not. That like leadership is associated with masculinity.
That's right.
Power is associated with masculinity. Strength is associated with masculinity. Physical, like, objectification of sexuality and sexualization is done by masculinity, and there's only one way to do it, or there's only one object that is worth your time to objectify. And these are all tropes that are really problematic because, again, if you live anywhere outside of that, if your purview is out anywhere outside that limited spectrum, then you yourself feel dehumanized, but you don't have the tools or the understanding to really kind of understand that because you're constantly being engaged by this hegemonic kind of traditions or these tropes or these dominant standards. So it was really cool to just take the moment and time to kind of go over that, look at a few intersections or a few places, a few television shows or movies or sports, quote-unquote, unheroes that have been a part of that tradition. And it's cool now to see that, have the tools and understanding to identify it, and now start kind of facilitating some changes.
Thank you for sharing. So I guess now it's time for, what do we call it? Champagne Papi.
Yeah, I made that mistake there. I was like, that's not the right name of the episode. The name of the episode is actually Teddy Perkins. So we're maybe going to call this Teddy Perkins. Samantha's mad at me because I made a mistake. My bad. I used the wrong Google.
No, but I love Champagne Papi.
Well,
Can we just call it that? I know it has nothing to do with what we're talking about now, but
we'll workshop it.
We should find another segment for Champagne.
So on this week's Champagne Papi, a.k.a. Teddy Perkins, a.k.a. Dad Bod, it's economist Eli Moore. We break down, what it's like to be an economist, sure, but also what it's like to be a father down in Houston, Texas, to his two great and awesome kids. So get excited for that. And this is Teddy Perkins.
Thanks, everybody. My name is Remoy Phillip, and I'm so incredibly happy to have an old and good friend with me on the phone. His name is Eli Moore. He is an economist, I think, but he's also a father and a dad, and that's why I'm glad to have him on the phone today. Eli, you there?
Yep. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I'll meet people here in New York, right? And I'll get really excited because they'll say they're from Texas, and I'm really like ready to like share a bond, and then I'll be like, okay, so where are you from in Texas? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say they're either from like Dallas, Austin, or Houston, bar none. And I'll immediately think to myself, nah, you ain't from Texas.
That's the truth. I mean, the geography of Texas is crazy, and so many people don't understand it.
Yeah, I mean, in a weird way, but like an honest way. Whether you're from Houston or whether you're from Amarillo or Canyon or whatever, it's like being Texan or whatever is synonymous with being a man. It's kind of like it's like the cowboy element or the bootstrap mentality and the idea of community. It's like this weird relationship with being a Texan. You're almost born being a quote unquote man. You know what I mean?
I think so. What I've always noticed from living in Arizona for a little while and traveling a lot, every now and then I come across other cultures or groups of people that I feel like I can relate to, and they tend to be groups like people from Quebec who have a whole lot of national pride in their particular area and their province, and they generally, to the rest of the country of Canada, from what I've learn from the few Canadians that I've met. Most of the people who are not from Quebec kind of have some animosity towards people from Quebec, and people from Quebec have some animosity towards people who are not from Quebec. And it all boils down to a lot of pride about where they're from and feeling that they're from a better place than the other person. And I think that there's something about that exists in Texas. There's a lot of things from our history for people to be proud of. And so it's interesting because I think that it always tends to, in the case of Texas, it does exemplify itself a lot in masculinity type things. I mean, there's the cowboy on the horse, and you have canyons and wide open places and oil money and all sorts of other things that have become part of, I guess, our masculine culture in some way.
For so long, that was beautiful. That was almost idyllic, right? Like that upbringing and that childhood was perfect. And even for a short while, like after I left or when I was a little bit older, I still held that kind of like halo effect of how perfect that Texas, my youth, my adolescence in Texas and associated as being a Texan was. But now I'm a little older. I kind of feel the opposite, and it doesn't feel that Texan identity and that masculinity that's ingrained there. It doesn't feel as idyllic. I wonder, I mean, you're still there, but you're in Houston, which is a very metropolitan, large city. Do you have that same appreciation or maybe depreciation?
Well, I think that the thing that I've learned a lot over the years about masculinity is that I think that there are different people who try to put masculinity in these binary boxes where, naturally you have male and female, and so people tend to try to come up with things, well, okay, men like to go fishing and women like to go shopping, and men like to not talk very much and play pool, and women like to go get their nails done and talk all the time. And they come up with all these things to put people into boxes, and as I've grown up, I've realized people of all genders are very different from one another. And so you have guys that like to go shopping. You have guys that really care about style. You have women who like to go hunting. You have different people who have different personalities, and there's all these different types of things. So when it comes down to masculinity, this idea, which I think is probably even broader than a Texas concept, but more of an American concept, this idea that masculinity is all about being rough and tough and, I don't know, walking around with a club and your shirt off with hair on your chest and beating things, I think is it's only a small piece of who guys are. I do think that most guys can, probably on average, can relate to some of the kind of concepts that get brought up in regards to fighting wars or getting pride about battle or watching shows that have lots of action scenes and things like that. There's something that is sort of innate in guys in that way, and those are some of the concepts and themes I think that are so prevalent in kind of Texas history, things like the Alamo and people fighting for their freedom and all these kind of things. But I also think that what it means to be a man is so much bigger than some of those simple themes. I think that as I've become a father, I've realized that caring for my family, being there for my family, raising my children, to think about others and to take care of others, and to be peaceful and to seek for peace and to seek for resolution to conflict, these types of things. These are things that I feel like are just as masculine and require even more strength than the outward strength that so often gets exemplified in things like action movies and fighting and all the other things that get associated with kind of the strong, brutal behavior of the male gender.
No, absolutely. But before, I like what you're pointing at here, and you're talking, you're making the argument in part for like there's a nurture and a nature aspect. There's something that is somewhat innate, and there's a lot that is cultural. But me and my podcast co-host Samantha, who isn't here right now, so I get the opportunity to make this fight. Since you're an economist and you kind of look at numbers and shit, like, what are we saying here? It's like 50% nurture, 50% nature. It's like 85% nurture, 15% nature. Like, what are we thinking here, Eli? What is your honest assessment?
I think that there's a lot of it that is that is sort of evolutionary, that's designed in the way that that just our bodies work. I do think that a lot of that ends up being kind of probabilistic. I mean, I think that if you're a guy, you probably have a higher probability of being inclined to go fight somebody whenever something bad happens. And I think that that's an evolutionary trait that helped our species survive. I think that also we're extremely adaptable. I think that that's a human characteristic across both genders. And so I think that our adaptability allows us to, you know, kind of be like a chameleon and adapt to our environment. And if our environment says men should behave this way, then our natural tendency is to try to behave that way. And so we tend to create boxes, we tend to find patterns and say, this is how the people in my area who are men behave. So if I want to be accepted by this tribe and I want to be accepted by my community, then I'm going to behave that way as well. And if I don't behave that way, they're going to try to put me in a different box. And that's something that I think is pretty prevalent today, especially amongst, especially within guys. I think guys are pretty narrowly defined a lot within our society.
No, I mean, whether it's diplomatic, whether it's a smart, good answer, like I think you're very much sure. And pointing to that adaptability, whether it's like a conscious or unconscious decision, is huge, and it plays a huge role in the systems of our society. But as we as individuals abide by those systems and adapt to those systems. But you were saying something earlier, which I really think is important, and it's the crux of why you're here. Is like you're a father. How many kids do you have right now?
2 kids. Yeah, 4-year-old and a 2-year-old.
Well, one's a boy, one's a girl, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, my 4-year-old Barrett, he's a little boy, and then my daughter Lane is just turned 2 at the beginning of November, and they could not be more different from each other, but they're also in so many ways similar. It's this weird thing where sometimes you see them and you go, my gosh, these 2 are exactly the same. They're obviously our children. And then there are other times where I look at them both and I say, where did you come from and where did that come from? My son, the day he was born, I remember it like it was yesterday, and the doctor put him on my wife's chest, and he lifted his head up and kind of looked around like, where am I? And he was analyzing everything around him. And so clearly very analytical, very thoughtful, is always kind of thinking about things and looking at the world, trying to figure out what's going on. He's extremely kind. He's just the sweetest boy. My daughter, when she was born, the doctor picked her up, and she just screamed this blood-curdling cry. And he said, yep, she's there, you know. And he put her down, and we were like, we gave birth to a pterodactyl. What in the world is happening? And she is loud, and she has this just tremendous amount of passion and independence. I mean, Barrett has always been the kind of son that he's looking to us for, hey, what do you think I should do, or how should I behave? What would you want me to do? And we always like to say that he's the kind of kid that we're always going to have to encourage him to do things. Lane's the kind of kid that is always trying new things. She's the one we walk into the kitchen and she's standing on top of the countertop and we have no idea how she got there. You know? It's great. It's so much fun.
I mean, in a way, that's like a beautiful, typical, atypical family, right? You're the 2 parents with these 2 completely different kids, but that share something very similar, which is your genes, but also the love within your family. And I look at that circuitry, and I wonder, as the father, as kind of what society would say is the protector, our society would say to some degree as the protector, like, this is real talk. Like, does the current world climate, like from politics to our environment to, you know, technology and reality and what all that could be, and how does that affect you or your thinking on being a father and what fatherhood means in this day and age?
I want my kids to experience things and to see things that I didn't see and I didn't experience until I left home. I want them to know what the rest of the world is like in broad broader ways than I did. And so there's this piece of me that is excited about showing them all these things that I haven't even discovered until, I graduated from high school or graduated from college. At the same time, there's, you having access to the internet and technology and seeing the way that our world is headed. There's also so much that you feel obligated as a parent, at least I do, to protect my kids from and shelter them from, to make sure that they only become exposed to things when they're capable of dealing with it and they can handle it. And there's a fine balance in there where it's difficult as a parent, I think, to try to decide when is it okay for my child to become aware of something. But, there was just a couple of days ago, we go to a restaurant and some football game was on, and when the football game was over, it switched over to the news, and there was a scene from Aleppo, and there was this child lying on the ground covered in dust and blood coming out of his nose and his mouth, either dying or dead or something traumatic. And my son noticed it before I did, and he just said, "Daddy, what's that?" And I look up, and I'm like, oh, my gosh. My 4-year-old doesn't need to know about some of the terrible things that are going on in this world. And so, you kind of have to bypass it. Oh, it's just something terrible. It's just some bad show. You don't need to watch this. And so, change the channel or something. But it's difficult because you want them to be exposed to things and learn about things, but obviously you also have to protect them because they're little kids.
No, that's absolutely true. And the thing is, especially when we were kids or when we were younger, you can't really understand this as well. But not only is the world affecting the children and the world is changing when the children are changing, but it's the same that goes true for parents as well, right? Parents are living in a changing world constantly, and they have to find a way on the fly to adapt and be understanding and also permissive and also protective and all these things at the same time. And it seems like, this is maybe revisionist history, or this may be recency bias, but especially right now, it feels the world is changing very fast. And especially when it comes to masculinity, and as these things change quickly and rapidly, honestly, you as a father, how does that affect you as a father and as a quote unquote man?
I think that it has a profound effect in many ways. I think one of the strongest ways is, as I think about it, is I'm watching all the things that are going on around us and how rapidly everything is changing. You start to understand all the different types of people and the different types of ideas about that are probably just the different world views that exist. I don't think that particular view of masculinity where guys will be guys, they'll say things that are disgusting and they'll say things that are offensive. They'll be forceful and aggressive towards women because that's what women want. Or, women are always looking for the jerk, so you should behave like the jerk. All these some of these attitudes, I think, are being brought to light. And to be honest, I'm kind of glad that they are it's terrible that they're happening, but I'm glad that they're being brought forward because I think that those particular behaviors, they shouldn't define masculinity. They should define irresponsible behavior. And there's so much of that behavior that feels like high school. It just feels like there are all these people who grew up and became adults, and they were 50 years old, and they're still behaving the way that they did in high school. And that to me, I'm not even sure that I would classify it as their view of masculinity as much as I would just classify it as their inability to actually grow up and behave like an adult. It's unbelievable what many of the men in our society are doing today.
With all that in mind and what all that is happening, and knowing that there are these things that aren't necessarily associated with masculinity but irresponsible behavior, still, having a boy as a son and a girl as a daughter, how does your parenting and your fathering differ between the two, especially knowing some of the things we know about our culture now? How does that affect that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that for my son, I think I've always been under I guess to use an analogy, this may be the best way that I know how to describe it. You go take these personality tests, and a personality test will usually tell you, oh, you're an analytical person, or you're a creative person, or you're a person who's really good at communicating, or you're a person who is whatever the other buckets are. I can't even think of them all, but there's all these different buckets. You're a red person, a yellow person, a blue person, a green person. They have all these different ways of putting people in buckets. And I think the thing for me that I want to instill on both of my children, but especially my son, I think given that I'm a man and I want him to grow up to be a great man as well. I hope that I want to be a great man. I want him to be a great man. I want him to realize that your behavior, the way that you act, the things that you try to become good at, the things that you want people to see about you, they don't all have to fit in a single bucket. You can be a strong man who won't back down whenever someone threatens your sister or threatens your mother or tries to fight you and you're protecting someone who's defenseless, something like that. You can be that person. You can also be the person who first tries diplomacy, that first tries to calm things down just by talking to people. You can be the person who takes a hit and looks and turns the other cheek. You can do both of those things. You can be a creative person who also likes math. You can be a scientist who also thinks about things creatively. I mean, you can be so much. There's so many things on this planet that you get the opportunity to experience. And all of these things, I think so often, people try to tell everyone, find out who you are and just be who you are. And I think that's great advice, except that oftentimes it comes with this connotation of you're this narrow bucketed person who's only going to be good at one thing, and you've got to figure out what that thing is, and then you just have to be known as the person that does that one thing. And I think that people can do so much more.
Well, Eli, I've actually yet to meet your kids, and I hope to do soon one day, but I do know that they are in good hands and they have a good father. So thank you, Eli, for being on the podcast today and sharing your thoughts and your experiences. And it's important because I think whether other fathers are out there listening or other young men are out there listening, you're speaking to words of experience and words of experience in a world that needs good examples of good fathers and understanding fathers and thoughtful men. So thank you, Eli.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
So thank you guys so much for listening. Again, please hit us up at Twitter at MASKulinity Pod. That's always with a K. And Facebook, Masculinity Podcast. Please, we would really love to hear what your top 3 hegemony or dominant standard, lists is. So please send us that. We want to talk about it on the show. We really want to get an ear for what you guys are thinking out there about like these crazy ass dominant standards that we're forced to live in. Anyway, my name is Samantha and Remoy.
My name is Remoy George Phillips, sexy voice.
Okay. And this has been Masculinity. Thank you for listening. Shout out to Champagne Papi.
Peace.